Hey everybody, this is Will, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about what very well may be the most important tutorial I've ever made as it relates to tracks. So bear with me here. The reason I'm saying that is because today we're going to talk about getting audio out of your computer, not just getting it out of your computer, but splitting it. Click on one side, tracks all your other content on the other side, and then how to connect that to your soundboard. Here's why I think it's the most important tutorial I've ever done. It doesn't matter how well formatted your Ableton songs are, how efficiently you built your set, how much freedom and flexibility you have in your set. If no one can hear it, then what's the point, right? So today what we're going to talk about is not just getting audio out, not just splitting it, but doing it in what I think is the easiest, most simple, straightforward, and most inexpensive way to make this happen. So there's a lot of different ways to get audio out of your computer using Dante. We've got a great course on using Dante, creating a redundant Dante setup, using sends and returns. That's what I teach. That's the approach that I take. We talk about using an audio interface, even a redundant audio interface with multiple outputs. But in today's video, we're going to say what's the easiest, most inexpensive, most straightforward way to make that happen. All right. So if that's what you're interested in, that's what you're looking for, then let's dive in. The first thing I want to talk about is what we need to make this happen. The most important thing is your computer. That's kind of like, well, duh, Will, but we're going to need your computer and we need a headphone output of your computer. The next thing, and this is the secret sauce to make this happen really, really affordably, is this guy. This is the Hosa CMP 153. There's also a 159, which is a little more distance, is a longer cable. But what we essentially have is three cables here. We have one that's going to go on our computer, and then these two cables that we're going to use to split. Again, most important piece of this is splitting that content. The next thing we're going to need is two direct boxes. You may have heard these referred to as DIs, which is short for direct injection. But essentially what that's going to do is it's going to take these two cables and it's going to convert those to XLR so that we can plug it into our soundboard. Now, you may be watching this and going, but Will, my soundboard is right next to me on stage and I could just plug these into my soundboard. If that's your particular setup, great, go for it and just kind of skip through the rest of the video. But I'm going to create this video for the 99% of us that our soundboard is back somewhere else and we're on stage doing this, okay? So we've got our computer. We've got our Hosa CMP 153 or 159. Next, we have two direct boxes. Again, if you're unfamiliar with direct boxes, check out my video where I did a shootout of, I believe, the top 5 best direct boxes. I've included links to those below if you're unsure as to what direct box to use. And in fact, have a conversation with the audio engineer at the venue that you're at. If you're in an installed situation like a church or something, you probably have direct boxes there already. A lot of times going into a venue, as long as you put it on your rider, they may have direct boxes. But again, they're so inexpensive and so affordable, it may be worth you just buying them and keeping them in your rig. But we need two direct boxes, or you could get one stereo direct box, which means two independent inputs and two independent outputs, basically in one box. So completely up to you. The final thing we need is two XLR cables. Again, and remember, it's all about the split. So we have two direct boxes, we have two XLR cables. Okay, with that, let's hop on stage and let's talk about the on-stage setup. Then we're going to talk about what we have to do at the soundboard. And then finally, we'll talk about what we need to do actually in Ableton Live. So starting on stage, the first thing we're going to do is take that Hosa CMP cable and we're going to take the headphone side, the 1/8 inch side, and we're going to plug it into the headphone jack of our computer. So once we get that plugged into our computer, then we want to take the left side of our cable. So the left side of our Hosa CMP 153, 159, it may be labeled left, it may be labeled tip, but it's probably the black side of that. And we're going to plug it into one of our direct boxes or into the first input of our stereo direct box. Now it's important, again, separation is key. I'm going to keep saying that split, the separation is key. So on this direct box, potentially consider labeling it, putting a piece of board tape that says click so that you can keep that straight. You always know which direct box you should plug into. So we're going to plug one side of that into that direct box, again, so that we can keep track of it and know exactly what we're doing. Now, the next thing we're going to do is take the other side of our Hosa CMP cable, the red side, right is red. That's how I remember it. We're going to take the red side and we're going to plug that into our other direct box. Okay. Again, consider taking some board tape and labeling it so that you know the difference between your click direct box and your other direct box. Okay. So we've plugged in our headphone side to our computer. We've taken our two cables and plugged them into two separate direct boxes. Now we need to connect those direct boxes to our soundboard. But again, if you're in 99% of most situations I've ever been in on stage, the stage is here and the front of house scenario, the soundboard is 500 feet away. Maybe it's even further. Maybe it's in a completely different room because it's like a broadcast setup or something like that. How are we going to make that happen? So that's where those two XLR cables come into play. We're going to take one side of our first XLR cable and connect it to our click direct box. And then we're going to take the other side of that XLR cable, and that's going to go into what's commonly referred to as our stage snake, or maybe our floor input box, whatever you want to call it. And that's a box of multiple inputs that lives on a stage, typically by the drum riser. Maybe it's side of stage, it's back of stage, so that it's out of the way. And you plug XLR cables into that. Again, and the reason we have that is because of that long distance between stage and front of house. We're going to plug into our stage box there, our stage snake, and then under the ground or maybe the side of the room or whatever, we have a bunch of XLR cables that are all spooled up together that are running back to our soundboard. So we're going to take that first XLR cable, plug it into our stage snake, into our click input. We're going to take our second XLR cable, plug that into our tracks direct box, into the output, and then that's going to go into the input of our stage snake for our separate input. Now you may be watching this and going, well, Will, which inputs do I plug into? Is it 1 and 2? Is it 10 and 11? Is it 8 or 9? Tell me, man, tell me. It all depends on your setup, and you want to communicate with your audio engineer. Or maybe if you're maybe at a small church, like a mobile setup, and you're the person in charge, you just want to think about what available inputs you have on your audio console and just figure out where those are on your stage snake. And typically if you have a good setup and you say audio, inputs 1 and 2 at front of house, typically it should be set up to where your stage box is inputs 1 and 2 as well too. But communicate with your audio engineer, tell them I need 2 inputs, 1 for click, 1 for tracks, and they'll tell you where to connect your stage snake. So now that we have that, let's take a walk back to the soundboard and talk about what needs to happen there. Now, again, you may be watching this and you're going, I'm just the drummer. I'm just the keyboard player. I'm just a singer. I'm not an audio engineer. Well, if that's you and you're working with someone else, then pause for a second and send them this video. You can take notes and say, here's what Will said, but probably the best thing is just share this video with them, send them this video, because there's 2 very important things that need to happen back at front of house. The first thing is we need to make sure that click input that we got, that only goes to the band's in-ears. And by that, I should rephrase that to say only the in-ears of the people that are on stage. The band, vocalists, anyone that's on stage using in-ears, only the click should go to their in-ears. The click should not come out of our front of house speakers. It should not come out of our main speakers, because we don't want people that are sitting in the audience to hear click. I've been in situations and scenarios where you see the drummer press spacebar on Ableton and you hear the kind lady counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and the audio engineer had no clue where the input is and they're trying to find it and chase it. And it's not a fun situation. So most important thing is we need to make sure our click input is turned down so that only the band can hear that. Now, depending on your console and your setup, there's different ways to do it. Sometimes you can just turn your fader down on your like master level. And then in your in-ears, turn up your like aux send to the band if you're mixing in-ears. If you're using like an Avion, maybe you're using a live mix, you're using Behringer's power play system, something like that, a personal monitoring in-ear system. You want to make sure that that's routed properly so that the band can hear that. Just because people aren't hearing it through the main speakers, it's essential the band hears that. So based on your setup, maybe bring your fader down. In some scenarios, you can click on the input and unassign it from the master bus. Again, if these terms are over your head, that's fine. Send it to the audio engineer you're working with. Some consoles, you can even mute it on your master level, but it's going to keep going to the band's in-ears based on how that's set up. But the most important piece of this, make sure no one in the house, no one listening through the main speakers can hear click, but that the band and everyone else using in-ears can hear it. Next, the second important part here is making sure that other side of content, again, I'm calling it tracks just for shorthand, but it could be drum loops, it could be keys, it could be pads, it could be background vocals, whatever it is, everything other than our click and our guide or our cues, slates, if we're using that, is going to go to that second input. We need to make sure that input, that the band can hear it in their in-ears, and we want to make sure that everyone hears it at front of house. So However you need to do that, do the opposite of what I said before. Make sure it's assigned to the master bus. Make sure the fader is turned up. However you need to do that, make sure the band can hear it and everyone at front of house can hear it. Okay. So with that setup made, and again, it depends on your console, depends on your scenario. So you've got to contextualize it to that. Let's step on stage though, and let's talk about the Ableton side of this, because we haven't ran Signal yet. We're not able to set levels yet. We haven't done a sound check because we have to do some work in Ableton Live. So first, let's go into Ableton Live. I've got a full Ableton Live set built here. I'm using Ableton Live 11.1. It's the same exact process no matter what version of Ableton you're using, no matter how many stems you're using, whether you're grouping your tracks, whatever. Again, I'm going to show you the most straightforward, simple way to do this. So first thing we need to do is go to Live's preferences. This is Command comma if we're on a Mac, Control comma if we're on a PC. We're going to go into preferences here. And what we need to do is go and find our audio interface. So let's click audio here. We want to go to the audio device setting. And this may be a little different based on your setup, but for me, under audio output device, see where it says external headphones. You can see all the different options I have here. I could select my speakers, which we don't want, but I'm going to choose external headphones. Again, based on your setup, you may be using a PC and it's named something else. You may be using a computer that has a card that then gives you a headphone output. Whatever it is, make sure whenever it's named, make sure you choose that proper output there. Okay. Really quickly, I'm just going to give a blanket statement. Leave your sample rate set to 40/1. Leave your default SR and pitch correction set to high quality, and set your buffer size to 512. It's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. We have plenty of courses on From Studio Stage that walk through that and explain it, but for now, just trust me and do that. Okay, let's get out of this now. With my audio interface selected, I'm going to close preferences. And let's talk about, again, the most important part of this setup. What did I say is the split, the separation. How do we do that in Ableton? We need to separate our click, our guide, our cues, whatever, from the rest of our content. So let's talk about that. First, let's pretend we're using Ableton's built-in metronome to make that happen. So one, we need to turn our metronome on here. And then let's go to session view. So if you're in arrangement view like I am now, then we're going to press tab on our keyboard, or we're going to click over here to move over to session view. And once we're in session view, we want to go to the cue out setup right here. And cue out is where we route and choose which channel of our interface of our headphones does our metronome come out of. So 1/2 right now means it's going to come out of both sides. So if I look at my Hosa CMP cable, my click right now is coming out of both my right side and my left side. I only want it to come out of the left side. Okay. And so left equals 1. So the way we do this is cue out. We're going to select 1. Okay. So when we talked about that direct box, and again, I said, make sure to plug in the black side of the cable first into your direct box. That's going to represent your click output. Okay. So if we're using Live's built-in metronome, that's what we would do there. Select cue out 1. That's going to put it on the black side, the left side of the cable. We have our volume control here for our click that we could adjust, which is great. Now let's talk about what if we're using a click track in Live as opposed to Live's built-in metronome. What if we're using some sort of track in our live set for our click? So I'm going to turn off Live's metronome in this case. I've got a track here that's dedicated to click. This is a part of my free track template. You can download it by heading to fromstudiostage.com/template. That's where you can get that for free, completely for free. You can also download the click track files that I'm using in this set or anything by going to fromstudiostage.com/free. Tons of great free resources there if you want those. But I've got this click loaded into my live set. So how do I route this? Well, in this case, I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my track where it says audio 2. And if you don't see this, go over to the right-hand side of your screen and you'll see two different things. This M represents our mixer, which we don't need right now, but IO, which represents our inputs and outputs. So if you don't see this on your track, then click IO. If for some reason you still don't see it, then you maybe have your track like this or something. So click right in the middle here to bring your clip view down. Okay. So audio 2, we're going to choose external out. And what is external out? External out is what we defined right here in audio. Okay. So audio output device is our external out. So that's our headphones. So we're going to do external out, and we have the option between 1/2, which is stereo, 1 or 2. Because it's click, we're going to choose 1. Now, what if we have a guide cue? What if we have a slate track, a cues track, whatever you want to call it, so that our band can follow along and know exactly where we're going? What do we do there? It's the same process as our click. We want to go audio 2. So right here's my guide, audio 2, external out. I want to make sure that I have one set. So I could have multiple tracks here. In fact, in this set, I have what I call an original track, which is a reference tool. I want to make sure this doesn't go to the master output. So for me, I'm going to do external out and I'm going to set this to 1. So you could have however many tracks that you want to send there. Maybe you have a guide cue, maybe you have a pitch reference, whatever it is, make sure that only goes to 1. Now, what do we do about the rest of our content? So in my set in particular, I have all of my songs grouped together here. So all of my stems for songs rather grouped together. So I have 3 different songs loaded in. However you have this set up, let's actually ungroup our final track here just so that you can see what this looks like. So now I have 2 songs grouped and then 1 that's ungrouped. Whatever your setup is, here's the essential piece. If we're using a group track, what I mean is all of our stems are in this group track and they're going to our group. We want to make sure, and by default they will be, we want to make sure all of our tracks that are within this group are routed to go to our group channel here. So audio 2, the name of the song is Living Hope. So I want to make sure that that's routed to Living Hope. Okay. And you can see all of those that are part of this group are routed. That's their default state. So I can fold up this group. On the audio 2 side of this, I want to make sure this is set to master. Okay, so this group is set to master. This group is set to master. If you have a bunch of tracks just by themselves like this, again, I'm just showing you this in case this is your setup. Then what you could do is click on one of them, hold shift, click on the last one. And then if you wanted to, you could then change all of them to audio 2 master. You just want to make sure anything that is, again, I'm calling it tracks content, anything that's not click, not guide, not slate cues, whatever you want to call that, we're going to treat as tracks. And we want to make sure the output of that is set to master. Okay. So now what is that? Let's go over to our master track. Earlier, we looked at our cue out, which is for our click if we're using Live's built-in metronome. But in this case, we're going to go to master out. Right now, it's set to 1/2. We're going to click here and we're going to set that to 2. Okay. One very important note that I want to mention here. What I just did there, some folks that I know, some people I've worked with will spend hours and hours working with their stems and reformatting and re-rendering their stems because they don't know about what I just did there. So what I did there is I took all of my content, which was set to be stereo, which means left and right, and I took it and clicked 2. So the thing that's super nice about setting that to 2 is that means I took all of my stereo content, no matter how crazy it is. Maybe I have like a crazy wild electric on the left and another crazy wild electric on the right. I took all of that and I summed it to a mono signal. In fact, I didn't do that. Ableton did that, again, just by clicking master out and setting that to 2. Now, I've worked with so many people, done one-on-one sessions, been in person teaching organizations and churches how to use Ableton Live efficiently. And they'll say, oh, well, we get our stems, we load them into Logic because we're doing 2 outputs and we take all of our stems, we sum them down to one stereo channel. And we bring them into Ableton Live so that we have just a mono channel of clicks and tracks. And I go, why? Why in the world would you do that? Because if you need to make a change, you've got to go back into Logic, you've got to go back into Pro Tools, whatever you're using, make your edit, re-render. Please do not do that. You're wasting time that's completely unnecessary. So in Ableton, I just drop all my stems in. Now, again, I group them and I do some extra stuff that we've talked about in previous videos. But if I'm doing a 2 output setup, I just set master out to 2. That handles all my summing for me. I don't have to do that in an external DAW. So with this setup, what we've done is we've sent tracks. And again, I'm using tracks to refer to anything other than click, guide. That's going to output 2. Output 2 is our red side of our cable here, right? This is our track side of our content. And then all our other content, which is click, guide. In this case, I had an original track that's going to 1. That's going to 1, which again, 1 is the left side of this, the black side of our cable. Okay. Now, at this point, our computer setup, we've routed from our computer to our direct boxes, to our stage snake, back to our soundboard, and hopefully our soundboard is set up. We need to check this and make sure that everything's fine. The last piece of this that I would suggest is make sure the volume, output volume of your computer is about 3/4, right? That's pretty loud, but it gives you some headroom if you need it. That's super important there. Now what you want to do is press play in Ableton and communicate with your audio engineer to do 2 things. One, do a line check and make sure on the click side of things, they only hear click, and on the track side of things, they only hear tracks. So if those are flip-flopped, then take your cables here, your Hosa CMP cables, and just swap those at the direct box. Now, if you have labeled your direct boxes, then swap your labels on those or switch the XLR cables, whatever you want to do. But do your line check first to make sure at the soundboard, when it says click, all I'm getting is click. And at the tracks input, all that I'm getting is tracks. Now, once you do your line check, then you want to do your sound check and make sure that you're getting enough gain from each of those. A couple other things to point out. If your signal going to the soundboard is pretty noisy, then communicate with your audio engineer, but they may have you do what's called lift the ground or change the ground on that direct box. And that's going to help clean up the signal and remove noise. That's one of the great benefits of using a direct box. The other thing is if your signal is too high or too low, they may have you adjust the pad on the direct box. So a lot of direct boxes have a pad that takes them down 20 dB, 40 dB, whatever direct box you're using kind of depends on that setup. But again, those are conversations, communication you have to have with your audio engineer to decide if that's something you need to adjust. So now that you've got plenty of signal, you know everything's right, you want to do your sound check to make sure that everyone in the band, people using in-ears, vocalists, whoever, have plenty of click and have plenty of tracks. And then the audio engineer front of house, she's going to make sure that there's plenty of tracks in front of house, change EQ, whatever we need to do. But the super important point that I want to leave with you as we wrap up this video is make sure that every time you step on stage that you do a line check, make sure click is just click and tracks is just tracks. And then 2, do a sound check to make sure you have enough click, enough tracks in your ears, and make sure that the audio engineer, that she has plenty coming out of the speakers at front of house. That's super, super important with this. Now, if you're just getting started with tracks, maybe you've been using tracks for a while, but you feel like there's some inefficiencies there, you don't have as much freedom or flexibility as you want, I want to encourage you to head to FromStudioToStage.com/free. I mentioned it earlier, but you can download my free Ableton Live template. You can download free click tracks, free guide tracks, free drone pads, LTC SMPTE files if you're using LTC to control video. All of that is available to you for free if you head to that URL. And these are resources that if you were to buy them, would cost hundreds of dollars. And in fact, many of them were created from products that I sell that cost hundreds of dollars, but you can get them completely for free. So again, head to FromStudioToStage.com/free to grab those. Everything from a template to time code, whatever you need, and everything in between, you'll find there completely for free. And if you enjoyed this content and you want to learn more about using Ableton Live on stage, then do me a favor, do 2 things. 1, hit subscribe to this channel, and then 2, hit the bell icon so that you're notified when we post new content. I post a new video every single day, 10 a.m. Central. So there's new content every single day that you tune in. If you happen to tune in live at 10 a.m. Central, then you can join the chat with people watching all over the world, engaging in the same content that you are engaging with. Thanks so much for watching this tutorial. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.